my fourth year, the Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Mary's. But I have over 25 years in the education field of doing this work. And I can honestly say it began for me probably at 7 years old, and I'll explain that a little later. But I grew up in Seattle in a very diverse inner city community and attended Catholic schools K through 12, and then on to Seattle University. And it wasn't until later that I realized what a tremendous gift my education and upbringing was. But I'll share with you that growing up as a child of color and female in Seattle's inner city, diversity was the norm for me and actually created a thirst and a curiosity to learn about, engage with, and have part of what I call my life circle, other cultures and diverse groups. I learned to appreciate at a very young age and be excited about diversity, and it has been a central core of my being ever since. But I also quickly developed a strong perception and understanding of the many injustices and disparities that so many others and I faced in society back then and currently today. As I comprehended the ugliness of the injustices and inequities, I made a choice at an early age to first be the very best representation of all of me, and secondly, to commit that my life's work would be to ensure equity, inclusion, and success for all. I learned at probably 5, 6, 7 years old, I began to realize that people made assumptions or decisions about me simply based on the color of my skin. My parents instilled in me that I could accomplish anything. And as a first generation college student, I was fortunate enough to enter college from a parochial school system that also established a foundational base for me not only to be successful, but also grounded me in a mindset of social justice. So I can say that my journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of being culturally aware, of being culturally responsive, of racial awareness and acceptance, and most important reconciliation, started as a child and is continued in all my work. I consider myself to be a constant learner, a multiculturalist. I strongly believe in what I refer to as a continual circle, and that is the cultural continual circle of learning, growing, mentoring, cultivating successors, giving back, learning more, and teaching others to do the same. That has set the course of my being. So in my professional career and in my volunteer commitments and my personal life, I have always worked to promote social justice, civil rights, and better understanding and acceptance among all people. You can say it's my passion to make a difference. And I believe each of us as human beings has a responsibility to do so. My personal philosophy and beliefs throughout my professional career and work as a community activist has enabled me to open the eyes and hearts and minds of many. I'm going to move on to the next question, because one of the things I want to leave time for is questions, if any of you have questions. So I was asked to address why or what significance Black History Month has for me. Well, I can tell you when I was in middle school and in high school, there wasn't anything in our schools about Black history. And I know what it felt like to be a child in the classroom when slavery would come up, and maybe I was one of maybe 4 or 5 Black students in the classroom, and everybody turned and looked at me or at us. And so as I moved through my education, I began to educate myself about Black history. I've had through the course of my career of doing workshops on cultural awareness, and I had someone say to me once in a workshop, and this is adults in the room, telling me that my history was slavery. And I said, no, my history is not slavery. Slavery is an event that happened to my people, but that is not my history. And so for me, when I think about Black history, one of the things that I think it's important for me is, for me, it's been a continual learning process of learning about the contributions and the successes and the achievements of people of Black heritage. You know, it's unfortunate that I had to learn that certain things like blood plasma, anybody who said someone sick in a hospital and they maybe had to have a blood transfusion, do not know that that process was created by a Black doctor, Dr. Charles Drew. And I share with you that for me, even at my age, I learned something new every day about the contributions of African Americans to this country. One thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, right now we think about the Black Lives Matter movement. That's not a new concept. I've had deep conversations with my students at St. Mary's and had to educate them that if you know your history, you would know the concept of Black Lives Matter is not something new. It goes back clear to slavery when we were brought to this country. So for me, it makes a difference for me. I tell young people, know your history, not only because it empowers you, but because you have a responsibility to the legacy of those who came before you. Okay, move to the last question because I want to be conscious of time. Again, the last one was, what advice would I have for students, um, particularly for BIPOC students? And actually, I think this advice is good for all students, but particularly for BIPOC students, I want you and I challenge you to continue to broaden your knowledge base, first of all, about your own ethnic background, regardless of what it is. And then the next step is to learn about everybody else's ethnic background. Education and knowledge is power, and that is something that no one can ever take away from you, is your education. You need to know what's going on in the world, in your community. Be an activist, don't stand on the by side. Be active, an advocate of social justice. One of the things when I first came to St. Mary's, and keep in mind, you know, I originally from Seattle, so it was sort of a, even though I worked in the Vancouver School District for 14 years and then on to Tacoma and on the East Coast and back here to Washington State, um, it was kind of a surprising jolt for me to realize the whiteness here in Portland, and particularly in our Catholic schools. You at St. Andrews are unique because there's so much diversity. But one of the things I imparted to the students was, I want you to build what I call not multicultural friendships, but multicultural brotherhoods and sisterhoods. And I share that because of, for me, growing up in a very diverse Catholic girls' school in Seattle, those are friendships that were not friendships, they were sisterhoods, and they have lasted me my entire lifetime. You know, and not only has it lasted me in my entire lifetime to keep me informed, it has shaped who I am. It gives me a different insight into the world. And it's not my friends, they're my family. And that's what I feel is a very strong need to happen for a change in our society. As you move on, particularly eighth graders move on to high school, and in Portland, it's predominantly white. So there's some advice I want to give to you, particularly in today's society. We've been dealing with a lot. We've been dealing with COVID. And then after COVID, we saw George Floyd murdered. And we saw the racial climate reach a pivotal point in our country. You need to speak up, speak out, and stand up. I wanted to share with you that the Catholic high schools here in Portland are doing deep, intense DEI work. And one of the things that I have imparted that's very important is student voice. I want to encourage every student of color as you move throughout your education career and in life, when you feel uncomfortable, when something doesn't feel right, you need to speak up. The schools are trying very hard to make a difference, but I'm a proponent of what I call student voice. And I constantly tell St. Mary's and students, we can't make a change if we don't know what's being done wrong. So yes, you have a responsibility to speak up. And more importantly, I never want students of color to internalize the microaggressions, the macroaggressions. It does you damage when you keep it internal. That's one point. But more importantly, change can't happen if you don't speak up. And sometimes it can be very difficult. You need to speak up not only for yourself, but for others. And as I tell particularly the seniors that are at St. Mary's right now, that are concerned about issues, I said, and sometimes young people will say, well, it's not going to make a difference for me. Here's what I want you to remember. It's about making a difference, not only for yourself, but for others that will follow behind you. And think about the differences in our society today if there hadn't been a Martin Luther King Jr., if there had not been a John Lewis, if there had not been a Stokely Carmichael or a Shirley Chisholm or a Barack Obama or a Kamala Harris. So it's part of your responsibility as not only for yourself, but for those that follow behind you. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I think we got about 10 minutes left. And I really would like to answer questions, give you insight. As I said, I could talk for hours, would love to come to St. Andrews and just spend the day. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so questions for Dr. Bell, you can put them in the chat, or you could, on the reactions on the bottom, you could raise your hand. So what did you hear her say that you want to hear more about, or? You could potentially, if you're okay with it, Dr. Bell, also questions about St. Mary's.
Sure.
We have some young women who are interested in.
Yeah, I think I interviewed a couple of weeks ago some students from St. Andrews as potential freshmen at St. Mary's.
Great.
What was the worst racism experience you've ever had? Wow. I think the worst was when I first moved to Vancouver in the early 80s. So keep in mind, I'm in a new community. I know it's predominantly white, but because I come from a background of being involved in having real strong connections with every race and group, it's when racial things happen, they really startled me. So on a sunny afternoon at noon one day, I was walking in downtown Vancouver towards the bank and passed a van of, I won't call them gentlemen, who proceeded to use the N-word and describe what they wanted to, how they wanted to assault me. And of course, immediate fear struck in, but I think probably the fear that struck in the most was that I was in a new place that I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know if anybody was going to help me. That probably um, is the worst. I've had milder things where when I was going to college at Seattle U, very active there, and had someone say to me, and this, I don't know whether to call this a microaggression or a macroaggression, had someone say to me once when they met me personally, "Oh, I didn't know from talking to you on the phone that you were Black," or to say to me that you really dress really nice for someone of your race. Those are mild. Probably the worst was the situation of knowing if I was not physically safe. So, yes, I I totally understand that one. I had to deal with that when I was at Vancouver School District, where I had to go to an elementary school where um, a teacher and an administrative secretary had said that to students, rather than realizing the benefit of being bilingual. That is a huge benefit. And in fact, before I left Vancouver School District, one of the elementary schools was changed to a dual language school where lessons were taught both in English and Spanish. So I always tell second language speakers, you really have an asset among everyone else. In other countries, particularly European countries, students grow up learning multiple languages, and think about how more advanced they are in our current world and our society. I had an opportunity once to bring Maya Angelou to Clark County, and she spoke multiple languages. So always see your native language as an asset. Do I know any other languages? No, I know a little Spanish. um, I know a little Tagalog. Um, well, and I shared that with you. When I talk about the friendships, my closest running buddies, girlfriends when I was going to school were Filipino. And I was very involved with the Filipino American Association in Seattle. The man who started it, Fred Cordova, I called him Uncle Fred. And I used to, as a teenager, could do the dance, the tingling, without getting my ankles caught. So yeah.
Nice, Dr. Bell. Cool.
Let's see. Okay. So no, that's been one of my regrets, that I have not learned other languages. That's kind of one thing that's really hard for me, is I can teach myself to sew, I can do all these different things, but learning other languages has always been difficult for me. And I admire people who can speak multiple languages. And to share with you an anecdote how beneficial it can be in those siblings. A very close friend of mine, I refer to her as little sister. She was from Brazil, was working in Clark County. We were at the Clark College, and I passed a group of young people who were speaking Spanish. I had no idea what they were saying, but they evidently were saying something negative. And all I know is Lenore whipped around, and I could tell by her tone that she was telling them up one side and down the other. And then she must have said to them, now I'm going to tell her what you said, because they just like took off. So, although I didn't know the language, my sisterhood with that person would not allow me to be defamed or dehumanized by those who spoke the language. Okay, what is favorite part of your job? Oh, the favorite part of my job. Wow. Well, I guess first of all is I would put being there for the students of color. St. Mary's is predominantly white. We've been doing a lot of work. But the first year I came, they had established probably 2 or 3 years before I came, a group that they called Women of Color in Action. And the first few days was there, girls of color would just come by my office, stick their head in the door and say, "She's really here." So the most important and favorite part of my job is interacting with the students of color. The second most important thing, of course, is making the changes happen at St. Mary's. I'm very proud to say that as a result of the protests this summer, that St. Mary's has been doing intensive work on anti-racism. Over 80% of our August workshops for before coming back to school was focused on anti-racism work. We've been doing it all year, even though we've been out remotely. All faculty and staff, even departments have been working on reviewing and changing and upgrading curriculum. Um, Making the change and seeing it happen, and more importantly, empowering young people. And when I say empowering young people, not only the girls of color, I enjoy having the deep conversations about race with girls who are white and making that change and difference. Okay. Did your family ever have a problem with being an ally to Black Lives Matter movements? I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. Um, no, my family, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. Of course, I'm an ally to Black Lives movements and others. I'm an ally to the LGBTQ plus community. Um, for me, it's about being transparent and open to all humankind. You know, so I'm not, like, again, I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, but I guess the best way I can answer it is I'm an ally to all social justice movements.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
A
one last
wonderful note
question.
to end on.
There's one last question here that I think
Perfect.
is important. What should eighth graders do to help prepare for attending a predominantly white institution? Um, know your history, number one. When you go into the predominantly white institution, at least the Catholic schools I can speak to, I know have a position such as mine. You need to make contact with that office immediately. You need to build, particularly because you're coming from all over the city, you need to build relationship with other communities of color who look like you and those who don't look like you. You need to become a strong support base of each other. The other thing I think is real important that you don't internalize things when they come up. I wish I could say to you things aren't going to come up, they will. But you need to build the confidence to speak up. The worst thing that can happen is for you to internalize it and move into what I call racialized trauma. So know your history, empower yourself to feel comfortable, even if it's no more, if you don't think you can bring it up. I've had students who will go tell a friend, who the friend will come to me. Take it to the person who is responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are going to be your biggest ally in the building. And I can comfortably say, because I have a relationship with all of the DEI personnel in the Catholic schools here, that they want to know. We can't fix it, we can't change it if we don't know about it. So to me, you need to know your history, empower yourself, feel comfortable with bringing things forward, don't internalize it, tell a friend, tell your parents, tell a counselor. You need to remember your greatness, and you have a right to be in any place that you choose to go. And that place has a responsibility to make you comfortable and let you know that you belong and make the changes so that you're successful.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we please give Dr. Bell a round of applause and thank you for being here with us?